Wow, you really weren't kidding around, were you? Asking us to deep dive into the entire 9/11 Commission report, that's a long one. But you're right, it's not about reliving that day, it's about understanding everything that led up to it. All those moments where it's like, "Wait, what? How did this happen? What were they thinking?" And most importantly, what can we learn from it all, even now, all these years later? So let's dive into those events, those decisions, those missed opportunities that still have people asking, "What if?"
It's massive for a reason. It's like trying to put together this giant puzzle, but
Mhm.
instead of a pretty picture, you get a chilling look at how even the smallest details can snowball into something huge. We're not just talking about terrorism, but how organizations work, how intelligence is gathered and analyzed, and those human elements that can make or break even the best laid plans.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way to put it. And speaking of puzzle pieces, this report has so many moments that make you wonder if they had just. It's not about placing blame, but about trying to understand those near misses. Like the Kuala Lumpur meeting in 2000. They actually had photos, intelligence agencies did, of several of the future hijackers just hanging out together. Khalid al-Mihar was right there in the pictures. How did that not set off every alarm bell in the world?
Well, that's the thing. It wasn't necessarily about bad people. It was more about bad systems. The report calls them intelligent stovepipes. These agencies were practically hoarding information instead of sharing it, like they were building chimneys instead of a bridge or something.
So it was less about missing the dots and more like refusing to connect them.
Exactly. And the 9/11 report uses a lot of examples of this, like the FAA's Passenger Pre-Screening System, CAPPS. They actually flagged some of the hijackers.
What did it?
They did. But get this, it only applied to their checked bags, not their carry-ons. They were so focused on bombs, the threat of bombs, that they completely missed the potential for a suicide hijacking using something as simple as box cutters. It's scary how even the most advanced systems are only as good as the threats they were designed to stop.
That's like having a state-of-the-art home security system, but it's only programmed to look for dinosaurs instead of burglars.
Yeah, and it gets even worse. The CIA knew that Meadhar, the hijacker from the photos, had a U.S. visa. They knew in 2000.
No way.
Yes. But that little detail, it never got to the FBI. The people who could have tracked him down.
So another missed connection, another puzzle piece that just never got put in the right place.
Exactly. And that's why the report emphasizes how important communication is. Not just regular communication, but interagency communication specifically. They knew we needed to tear down those stovepipes and figure out a more collaborative approach to both gathering and analyzing intelligence.
It's like that old saying, teamwork makes the dream work. Except in this case, the lack of teamwork led to, you know. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the other side of this whole thing. We've been talking about those missed chances, the failures that made 9/11 possible. But this report, it doesn't shy away from the attackers themselves. And honestly, this is where it gets really unsettling.
It does. It goes deep inside al-Qaeda, and what you find there is, well, it's not what you'd expect. It's not some shadowy group of fanatics in a cave somewhere.
Yeah, it's almost like reading about a well-run business, except their businesses,
Mm.
terror. And this really hits home when the report gets into specifics about the hijackers themselves. It's important not to glorify them, obviously, but to understand how this could even happen, we have to understand them. Like, take Mohammed Atta, the ringleader. He comes across as methodical, a meticulous planner. He even argued with bin Laden about not hitting the White House. What's up with that?
That's a good question. I think it shows that even in a group as supposedly disciplined as al-Qaeda, you still had individuals,
Right.
people with their own ideas, their own goals,
Yeah.
even within that twisted ideology. It's a good reminder that nothing's ever black and white.
Yeah, you've got that right. And here's another detail that blew my mind. Some of those hijackers were chosen not for their fanaticism or whatever, but for totally practical reasons, like their nationality made it easier to get into the U.S., that kind of thing.
It all goes back to vulnerabilities.
Mhm.
They understood how to exploit the system, but also how people thought back then. They knew what they were doing, that's for sure. It wasn't just blind faith. This was calculated.
Okay, so speaking of calculated, let's talk money. Because I always figured it was bin Laden's billions funding everything, right? Like he was writing checks from a cave. But the report says that's not really how it went down, right?
Not even close. That's one of those myths that gets busted wide open. You've got this whole network of donors, fundraising that was disguised as charity work a lot of times. They were moving money globally, using regular businesses to hide their tracks. It's pretty sophisticated stuff.
So we're not just talking about religious zealots here. We're talking about People who understand international finance, money laundering, the whole nine yards. That's what makes it so scary, honestly.
Exactly, because it shows how groups like this, they don't exist in some separate world. They use the systems we all rely on, legal or not, to get what they want. And the report really drives that point home, which is eye-opening, to say the least. And don't even get me started on the training camps. I mean, I had this image in my head of something really basic, like out in the desert somewhere. It was way more organized than that.
I bet.
They had camps that specialized in different things. You wanted to learn bomb making. They had a camp for that. Surveillance, how to blend in, even how to use the media. It was like a terrifyingly efficient school system churning out these weapons, basically.
Okay, now that's just messed up. No wonder it was so hard to get a handle on them. Because you're not just fighting an idea anymore, you're fighting something that's been put together with a terrifying amount of thought and planning.
Exactly. And that's what makes this such a challenge, even today. It's this whole ecosystem they built. The ideology, the training, the financing, and how they exploited weaknesses that were already there. You have to address all of it, or you're not really fighting back at all.
So it's not enough to just say we're against terrorism. You have to understand how it works, how it grows, how it sustains itself.
You've got it. And that's why I think this report is so important, even now, even all these years later. Because it's not just about what happened back then. It lays out a roadmap for how to deal with these kinds of threats. And it's scarily relevant even today.
So what are some of those recommendations? What did they say we should be doing differently? So we've talked about the enemy, so to speak. But the 9/11 Commission report, it's not just about pointing fingers, it's about solutions, right? What did they recommend we actually do about all this?
One of the biggest things that jumped out at me was this idea, and it's a big one, of fundamentally changing how we handle intelligence. Remember those intelligence stovepipes we talked about?
Yeah, those are bad.
The report basically said, scrap them. We need something totally different.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What did they have in mind?
The National Counterterrorism Center.
Sounds intense. What is that, like some kind of super secret spy headquarters?
Think of it like a central hub. All things related to counterterrorism, all the experts, all the information flowing into one place.
So instead of everyone hoarding their own little puzzle pieces, they're all working together on the same puzzle, finally.
Exactly. No more silos, no more working in the dark. Analysts from different agencies, operatives, linguists, everyone together sharing information, connecting the dots in real time. The goal is to get ahead of the threats, not just react after the fact.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, but that also sounds like a massive undertaking. Did it actually happen?
Well, it's been a process. They first set up the Terrorist Threat Integration Center, or TDIC, back in 2003 as a kind of first step.
Okay, and how'd that go?
It was a good start, but it didn't quite have the authority or the scope that the report envisioned. So, building on that, they created the National Counterterrorism Center, or NCTC, in 2004.
Okay, so they actually did it. And does it work? Is it everything the report hoped for?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The NCTC has a much broader mandate now, covering both intelligence analysis and operational planning. So, is it perfect? Probably not. But it's a major step towards that more integrated, collaborative approach that the report recommended.
So a work in progress, but progress nonetheless.
Exactly. And that's something to keep in mind about this whole report. It's not just about counterterrorism. It's about how we, as a society, deal with risk, with uncertainty, with the unknown.
Okay, that's interesting. Say more about that.
Well, think about those silos we keep talking about. They're not just a government problem, are they?
True. I've definitely experienced that in my own work. Different teams not talking to each other, things falling through the cracks.
Exactly. It happens everywhere. And this report, as tough as it is to read sometimes, it's a powerful reminder that we can always do better. We can build better systems, we can communicate more effectively, and we can't be afraid to challenge the status quo, especially when it comes to something as important as our safety and security.
Wow. You know, I started this deep dive expecting to be, honestly, pretty depressed by the end of it, but I'm actually feeling kind of inspired. Is that weird?
Not at all. I think that's the whole point. The world's a complex place, and bad things happen, but we're not powerless. We can learn from our mistakes, we can adapt, and we can build a more resilient future.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you, the listener, for sticking with us through this incredible deep dive. It's been heavy at times, no doubt, but also incredibly important. If you're looking for more information about the 9/11 Commission report, we've got links in the show notes, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.